I'd like to talk a little bit about something you mentioned before, trying to reason with others and working with others. And I know that during your first term, at least at the beginning, the expectations were, I think, a bit too high from people around the world. Everyone thought you were going to come in and in 5 days you were going to, eradicate world hunger and find world peace within a few days. And I think that was a bit unrealistic. But when you got to office, and I was very fortunate to have been part of your administration, I remember that you tried to find consensus and work with the Republicans, and you did get a lot of criticism for that. Would you have done something different in that respect? Because the second part of my question is, we're going to go back to our communities and bring this message to the trade associations and chambers of commerce. We're going to go out there and knock on doors and tell people why it makes perfect economic sense to bet on this new economic model, to understand that green economy is a great business for the companies. They're going to find people that don't necessarily agree with them. So what are your recommendations for them to face criticism? What should they do when they do find opposition?
When I came into office in 2009, the world economy was collapsing. So I didn't have that many choices except to try to move as fast as we could to reduce the stress that had frozen the financial systems and to try to restore growth and put people back to work. And we had to do that on a global scale because economies today are so integrated. And it is true that my friends in the Republican Party weren't as cooperative as I would have hoped when I came into office. I think that in democracies, particularly in big countries like the United States or Spain that have a variety of different peoples and perspectives and regions, that democracy is always going to be messy. There's always going to be arguments. It's never going to be as smooth. But it's worth it because I believe that I think it was Winston Churchill who once said that democracy is the worst form of government on earth except for all the other alternatives. And so it's frustrating sometimes to see the obstruction of an opposition party. It's frustrating sometimes to see a lack of compromise on issues. And yet, over time, what we've found is that the disadvantages of democracy are exceeded by the advantages. That we don't see the kinds of extremism and tragedy within democracies that you see from other forms of government. You see a preservation of individual liberty and freedom and human rights in democracies relative to other forms of government. And the price for that is putting up with people who are not agreeing with you all the time and finding ways to move forward and forge consensus with people who have a very different point of view. The thing that I'm most worried about right now in Western democracies is probably two things, though, and it's something we have to guard against. We have to guard against it in the United States, in Europe, around the world. The first is that our media has changed in a way that we haven't yet fully adapted to. It used to be in the United States there were 3 television stations. And so whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, whatever your political perspective, you're conservative or liberal, basically you got the same set of facts, the same the same reality. And so we might disagree on both the means of achieving certain goals, like creating a strong economy or our national defense. We might disagree with the ends themselves of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. But what we didn't disagree on were basic facts. So today, because of the internet, because of the multiplicity of media, what we're seeing more and more is that we don't even agree on the same reality. If you watch Fox News in the United States, then you see a completely different reality than if you read the New York Times. And I can have an argument with somebody about what to do about climate change. There might be somebody who's more conservative who says, there's nothing we can do about it. The Chinese are never going to agree to controlling their emissions, so why should we? It's going to hurt our economy. We should just adapt. Okay, that is an argument I can have. But if somebody just says to me, climate change isn't happening at all, and is in fact a conspiracy that is being promoted by liberals who want to destroy America, well, now I don't know what to say to you. And that increasingly is the kinds of arguments we're having, where we're not even talking about the same thing. I can't argue with you about whether we like this table if you tell me that is in fact a chair. But that's not unique to the United States. I think this is a problem that we're going to see more and more, and frankly, this is part of what has been exploited by certain forces internationally. The ability to target micro audiences and feed them their biases, their preconceived notions in ways that amplify difference, that increase difference, as opposed to bringing people together. That's problem number one. And a related problem number two. Democracies don't work if at some basic level, even when we have differences, there is some sense of trust, some basic sense of commonality that transcends our differences. And that's always hard to maintain, that sense of civic trust. It becomes more difficult to maintain as our countries become more diverse. And part of what you see with the immigration crisis in Europe, in some of the issues of people fleeing the violence in Central America and coming through our southern borders in the United States, is populations changing. People suddenly don't look like each other exactly. They may not worship in the same way. They may have different perspectives about certain issues. This is why the United States, I think, is such a is such an important experiment, because by definition, unless you're a Native American, you came from someplace else, or your parents, or your grandparents, or your great-grandparents came from someplace else. And so we look, you walk down the street in New York City, we have experience of people looking different and coming from different places, but then being bound together by an idea, being bound together by a set of principles. And what I worry about is where you get politicians not trying to bind people together around those common sets of ideals and values and institutions, but rather people who are trying to exploit and divide people based on race or ethnicity or religion or tribe. That's when democracy starts breaking down. That's when trust is replaced by fear. And that's where you start seeing dangerous trends taking place. That doesn't mean, by the way, that there's anything wrong with insisting that people from different places, immigrants, people of different cultures, backgrounds, regions, that they don't, in some ways, learn and adapt to the norms of a country. One of the great strengths of the United States in the past has been the degree to which we've been able to assimilate people from different countries, so that by the second generation or the third generation, they are American, not Spanish or Italian or African or Chinese. Absolutely. But they're Americans. And that's been a great strength. It's one that has a lot to teach the world as we think now in terms of the migration patterns that are taking place everywhere. But it's an approach to thinking about the world that requires a recognition of a common humanity that sometimes people find hard to see.